the D is thanks for coming. I think that just... I mean, I don't know. It's hard to...
It should be okay. I don't... I don't want to be always tempted spending it.
Right.
I'm going to go to the other. Either way, don't worry. Either I'll try to do it. And you don't have to worry about that, or I don't want to do it.
Do you want to do that? I can't probably do that. Yeah, I mean, I think to get a mic before the Q&A starts would be probably ideal. Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thank you for being here on a rainy Seattle Sunday morning. If you're joining us from around the world on our live stream, good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Danny Hoffman. I am the director of the Henry M. Jackson School of International Studies here at the University of Washington. And I'm very pleased and very honored to be able to welcome you to the 13th Annual Ladino Day, hosted by our Sephardic Studies program. Now, that's worth applauding for. We're very fortunate in the Jackson School to house the Strom Center for Jewish Studies and the Sephardic Studies program. This program represents the best of what we do as a school. As an institution, we're dedicated to understanding the world through its rich variety of languages, histories, cultures, political and economic systems. Sephardic Studies at the University of Washington does exactly that. This is a world-renowned program for the research, teaching, and recuperation of the histories, cultures, and language of Ladino-speaking Sephardic Jews. Our annual Ladino Day reaches hundreds around the world through our live stream. It's become a marquee event for Sephardic Studies, and it truly embodies the mission of the Jackson School to promote cutting-edge, interdisciplinary, global teaching, learning, and research opportunities. So I look forward to welcoming you again next year, and we look forward to hosting this event for years to come. And I do want to say just a quick thank you to all the staff that worked so hard to put this together. As you can probably imagine, many moving parts, and it's really been fun to see everybody working together to get this up and running today. Now, yes, thank you. Now, without further ado, I'd like to now introduce my friend and colleague and the Sephardic Studies Program Chair, Isaac Al-Hadif Professor in Sephardic Studies, Dr. Devin Naar. Dr. Naar is jointly appointed in the Jackson School and the Department of History here at the UW. He is internationally recognized as a scholar of Sephardic history and the Ladino language. Equally important, I think especially at this moment, Devin is a tireless public intellectual, committed to making sure that the work of this important program is accessible to global audiences. So Devin, thank you for that work, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Merci mucho, Danny. Thank you very much, and buenos días, buenas tardes a todos. It's a real pleasure to be here and to welcome you for the 13th Ladino Day. So this is Ladino Day's bar mitzvah. So we should really have a big party afterwards to celebrate Ladino Day having cumplido minyan, having fulfilled now the quorum for a 13-year-old, kind of like an adult in the Jewish tradition. Today's event is supported by the Lucy Benveniste Cavish Fund for Sephardic Studies. We miss Lucy very much. She was one of the original Ladineros. And the Sephardic Foundation on Aging in New York, which is a new sponsor for us. So you can see we have bi-coastal support for our endeavors. And we are also grateful for the support of the Middle Eastern Languages and Cultures Department and Spanish and Portuguese Studies here at the University of Washington, as well as the other organizations mentioned here, including the Sephardic Brotherhood of America, American Ladino League, Seattle Sephardic Network, and the two Sephardic congregations, as well as the Strom Center for Strom Jewish Community Center of Greater Seattle. As Denny mentioned, today's program would not be possible without our staff here at the Strom Center and part of Division 3 of the Jackson School. They work tirelessly to bring programs like this to publics. Many thanks to Aaliyah Vinakur, Kara Schoonmaker, Jenny McCullum, Rebecca Hyman, and the other staff and students who have made today's event possible. I'd also like to acknowledge my colleague, Janan Bolel, who will be teaching her course on Ladino next term, so sign up for that. And I'd like to acknowledge Noam Pianco, who serves as the Director of Jewish Studies and has been the Director of Jewish Studies for nearly every Ladino Day that we have had. We will proceed in a few parts. I'm going to offer a little bit of historical context, and then I'm going to invite some members of the community to share a few poems with us that are related to the theme of Sephardic Homelands. And then we'll turn to our conversation with our guests of honor, our keynotes, Rina Benmayor and Dalia Kandiyoti. And afterward, we will have a little bit of time for Q&A. So if you are here in person or if you are watching online, please submit your questions. You can get the QR code here, or you can go to Slido at Slido, slido.com/Ladino Day. That's slido.com/Ladino Day. And for those of you in person, and it's nice to see many familiar faces and also some new ones, please stick around afterwards for a kosher reception featuring Sephardic delicacies. Or as I really should say, the food will be kasher. Okay. So, let's begin. Sephardic Homelands, Spanish and Portuguese citizenship, and the question of belonging today. We're going to ask some big questions today. What exactly is homeland? What is the meaning of citizenship? How are we to understand questions of national belonging, both historically and today? These are universal questions, but we'll be tackling them through the specific lens of the Sephardic Jewish world. A world that brings us from Spain in 1492 across the Mediterranean, as you can see these various arrows, over more than 5 centuries, and beyond, to the Americas, to the Caribbean, to Asia, to Africa. It's a good thing that Sephardic studies is in international studies, because we've got essentially the whole world that will be part of our discussion today. To introduce some of these questions, I want to refer to a well-known French philosopher of Sephardic Jewish heritage, Edgar Nahum, who is still active today in France. He's 104 years old. And he's better known by his nom de guerre, Edgar Morin. His family came to France from Salonika, which was once in the Ottoman Empire and today is the second biggest city in Greece. And it was once home to the largest of the Ladino-speaking Sephardic Jewish communities. It's where my family's from, and it is also where one of our guests, Rina Benmayor, has family roots. But as Morin shows us, Sephardic roots are multiple, as our other guest, Dalia Kandiyoti, has emphasized in her writings about Morin. When Morin's father and uncle arrived in Marseille during World War I, they had to declare their nationality to get a residency permit. Turns out that was not an easy thing to determine. They argued that they were not Turkish, although born in the Ottoman Empire, where most of the Jews expelled from Spain in 1492 settled. They were not Greek, although their native city had become Greek. They were not Italian, although they had previously held Italian passports, probably because their ancestors had fled via Spain and Portugal through Italy to the Ottoman Empire. And they were not Spanish, although their ancestors had lived in Spain. So, what did they do? They declared that their nationality was Salonicien, Salonican. Now, that's not typically how we think of nationality, just a city. But the officer was initially very perplexed by this and resisted it, but they explained their situation, and they concluded, well, there's no other country to which they actually belong. Their nationality is of this city. Morin sees this dynamic illustrating a concept he develops called polyenlacement, polyrootedness, or multi-rootedness. Sephardic Jews, like his family, are, in his words, both stateless and polystated. They can belong to many different places as their roots stretch across the entire Mediterranean and, as we'll see, also beyond. In Morin's view, the city of Salonika, or the vast region of the entire Mediterranean, represent homelands for Sephardic Jews as much as any single nation-state. Morin sees himself as inheriting that multi-rootedness, with, as he says, one foot in France and the other in Italy, in Spain, in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's a lot of places to be in with only 2 feet, but this is the idea of multi-rootedness. The other thing to note is that the very concept of citizenship, as we understand it today with rights and duties, is a modern concept that comes with events like the French Revolution and spreads in the 19th and 20th centuries. And as Hannah Arendt famously noted, citizenship is the precondition for the right to have rights. If you don't have citizenship, if you don't have a state claiming you as their own, there's no way necessarily that your rights will be guaranteed. So it's a very powerful concept, a very powerful tool of the modern world. And the question of citizenship is also very challenging. In some ways, we could read all of modern Jewish history as a story of Jews gradually receiving the rights of citizenship in the countries in which they live. France, beginning in 1790, all the way to Russia, which did not give Jews civil and political rights, and that's where most of the world's Jews live. They did not have civil and political rights until 1917. Okay? Modern Jewish history can also be read as a story of Jews having their rights revoked, most infamously by the Nazi regime starting in 1933. So, as we think about the recent offers of citizenship extended by Spain and Portugal, we got to think about these two countries in a broader framework of several places that Sephardic Jews have staked claims on, and also expressed some reservations. I'd now like to invite members of Los Nuevos Ladineros to share a few poems in Ladino that speak about the concept of patria, the patrie, of homeland, and belonging. The Ladineros are a community group here in Seattle that gathers to read, study, and speak in and about Ladino. It is supported by UW Sephardic Studies, the Seattle Sephardic Network, and the American Ladino League. While the core group has been people of Sephardic heritage, it is open to all who are interested in learning about and engaging with this endangered language. So if you're interested in getting involved, see Hannah Pressman, you raise your hand right here in the front, or Jackie Wibian, who is right there in the middle. Everyone is welcome. As I call up the Ladineros to share a few excerpts of poems in Ladino, in the Judeo-Spanish vernacular, they'll briefly introduce themselves and where their families are from in Ladino, and then share the poem. You'll be able to follow along in English. So I'd like to begin by inviting Mika Sprowski to share the first poem, which already gives us a sense of Sephardic multi-rootedness by invoking two places, Spain and Sion, a reference to Jerusalem, to the land of Israel.
Buen día. Me llamo Mika Sprowski. Soy hijos de la familia Sprowski de Oregon. Y este texto, Sion y España, por Jaime Bejarano. Sion, querida mía, ¿por qué vistes de negrura? ¿Dónde está tu alegría? ¿Por qué tanta amargura por mis hijos cautivados? Mi amada España, por mis hijos estimados, voy a morir de mala hazaña. Pedrimos nuestra patraña, pedrimos la madreción, pedrimos también España, el nido de consolación. Pedrimos nuestro corazón, pedrimos la esperanza, buscamos la nuestra razón. Restemos sin hoganza. Gracias.
Merci mucho, Mika. Now, fascinatingly enough, Jaime Bejarano, who's here speaking about Spain and Sion, he was living at the time in Romania, and that's probably why he was thinking about these other places, because Romania did not give Jews civil and political rights until 1918, the end of World War I. So he was really longing for a place to call home. Interestingly enough, what happened to him? He did not go to Spain, he did not go to Israel, but rather he became the chief rabbi of Turkey. So you can see the multi-rooted dimensions at play right from the beginning. I'd now like to ask Adam Hasson to recite the next poem. By the time that this poem, originally a song in fact, came out in 1909, Jews in the Ottoman Empire in Turkey had acquired full political and civil rights with the introduction of a new constitutional regime.
De mañana buena y clara a los todos. Me llamo Adam Hasson. Soy hijo de Rubén y Luis Hasson. Y como muchos judíos aquí en Seattle, soy Rodesli y turco. Juntos combatiendo por Turquía. Mancebos de los Casales y muchos de Salonique. Nos hicimos voluntarios. nos fuimos a Askerlik. Ya la libertad se va a hacer, ya nuestra sangre se va a verter, por amor de la Turquía. Turcos, judíos y cristianos, todos otomanos, nos tomimos de las manos, jurimos de ser hermanos. Mujeres y criaturas, decimos en la soledad, si hicimos esta crueldad, fue por salvar a la libertad y a nuestra Turquía.
Bravo, Señor Hassan. Muchas gracias. This is a very patriotic poem. Very patriotic poem. Sephardic Jews sing themselves along with Muslims and Christians, Turks and Greeks, Armenians perhaps, willing to sacrifice themselves for their patria, the Ottoman Empire. But not all embraced this message. Some saw compulsory military conscription, in which this poem is in response, as undermining the security of Jews in the Ottoman Empire. And yet others were wary about the violence enacted by the Ottoman state against Armenians that culminated a few years later in the Armenian genocide. So we'll see with all these different places that Sephardic Jews have called home, sort of ambivalence or multiple attitudes, not just one uniform voice. I'd now like to ask Sylvia Angel to recite the next poem. As debates over whether Jews were going to receive rights as citizens played out across Europe and beyond, another ideology emerged, Zionism, which argued that Jews should establish a national home in Palestine, which was then part of the Ottoman Empire. And some Sephardic Jews embraced this cause.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sylvia Azos Angel. My father came from the island of Rhodes. My mother came from Turkey. And they married and had 7 children. I'm the youngest of their 7 children. I'm going to read a poem that's called Cante Nacional, written in 1912 and as published in La América magazine. Fiestaremos juntos gloriosos, a el día de hoy con gozos. Día alegre él es nombrado, con placer del judío membrado. 2000 años de tan desdeño, sin poder reposar sin sueño, arrastrando 1001 lugar, sin tener un cantón por hogar. Alzaremos la bandera por amor de nuestra tierra, con sudor del judío arrufiada, con rosas, con conchas ensembrada. Viva, viva Palestina, nuestra tierra carísima, con sudor del judíos arrufiada, con rosas, con conchas ensembrada.
Merci muy mucho, Sylvia. Now, what's interesting here also is that this vision had its detractors as well. Some Sephardic Jews from Salonika, for example, lamented that upon their arrival in British Palestine in 1925, that the Jewish agency refused to support them. Feeling distraught and rejected, they wrote an open letter that circulated across all the Ladino newspapers, concluding that Palestine is not the patria of the Jews in general, but rather it is the patria of the chosen part of the chosen people. Palestine is for the Ashkenazim, they declared, and they returned home. I'd like to invite Marlene Suriano-Vinokur to recite the next poem. As the Ottoman Empire collapsed in the early 20th century, Spain entered the picture once again. After Spain had lost its American colonies in 1898, Ángel Pulido, a Spanish senator, launched a campaign of what he called filo-Sefardismo, a kind of pro-Sephardic movement that sought to bring Sephardic Jews, whom he called Españoles sin patria, Spaniards without a homeland, back into the Spanish fold. That culminated in 1924 in a Spanish law offering citizenship to Sephardic Jews with a variety of conditions, and that became a precedent for the 2015 law.
Mi nombre es Marlene. Mi alcunia casada es Soriano Vinicur. Soy hija de Yosef Soriano Stambuli y Rebecca Varón Ismirli. A España. A ti, España bien querida, nosotros, Madre, te llamamos. Y mientras toda nuestra vida, tu dulce lengua no dejamos. Aunque tú nos desterraste, como madraste de tu seño, no escapamos de amarte como santísimo terreno, en que dejaron nuestros padres a sus parientes enterrados y las esencias de millares de tormentados y quemados. Por tú, nosotros conservamos amor filial, país glorioso. Por consecuencia, te mandamos nuestro saludo coloroso.
Merci, Marlene. You can see here, yet another place with a very strong identification. This is the multi-rootedness here. But of course, with Spain as well, there were Sephardic skeptics. La America, the newspaper to which Sylvia alluded to, the first Ladino newspaper published in the United States, its editor completely opposed the return to Spain of Sephardic Jews, given the painful memories of the Inquisition that he was not willing to forgive, and also what the editor viewed as the new promise of Zionism. Another option was to migrate elsewhere, including to the U.S., which became a new patria for Sephardic Jews. And I'd like to invite Hannah Pressman to recite the final poem.
Me llamo Hannah Pressman. Las alcunias de mi familia son León, Aljadef, Codrón y Galante. Mis parientes vienen de Rhodes y Bodrum, Turquía. Es un honor de participar en el programa hoy con los nuevos ladineros y con vosotros aquí en Seattle y todos los que están mirando alrededor del mundo. Y ahora mi texto. El soldado americano a su madre. Madre, madre, no llores. Esta es mi obligación. Servir mi patria querida, mi gobierno y mi nación. Madre, dame tu bendición. Roga por mi protección. Escríbeme por no pensar hasta que te podré yo abrazar. Dios protege y bendiga la América, nuestra nación. Esto lo suelto cada día del fondo de mi corazón. Hay que vencer esta guerra, salvar la humanidad, rescatar a todo el mundo por vivir en libertad.
Muchas gracias, Hannah. In this case, too, another patriotic poem, but there were critics and dissenters as well. In one of the Ladino newspapers in the United States, La Voz del Pueblo criticized the United States for being no different than the Ottoman Empire and saw the way that the United States treated black people as parallel to how the Ottoman Empire treated Armenians. The result, of course, in that instance was genocide. That was a very strong critique. And at the same time, it became difficult for some Sephardic Jews to even acquire American citizenship. And that was especially the case here in Seattle, where the naturalization judge in the 10s through the 1930s notoriously denied naturalization petitions by Sephardic Jews, as well as Armenians, South Asians, Japanese Americans, and others whom he deemed unworthy on racial and civilizational grounds, unworthy of U.S. citizenship. This kind of dynamic led another writer in New York, Simon Nassim, of the Sephardic Brotherhood of America, to declare that Sephardic Jews were a raza sin patria, a race without a homeland. And race meaning both in the way that race science was the typical language of the era, but also raza in the sense of raiz, in the sense of roots. They are rooted, but there is no country that is fully theirs. So in a certain sense, we're back to our philosopher Edgar Morin, the Sephardic Jew as both potentially stateless and polystated. So let's take a moment to give a round of applause to our nuevos Ladineros for bringing us the voices of Sephardic Jews in our language. I'd like to turn to our guest speakers now, who I hope will be able to help us delve deeper into the dynamics of contemporary Spanish and Portuguese citizenship. And it's my pleasure to introduce our guests. Acclaimed scholars and Sephardic Jews themselves and personal friends, there are no better guides for us through the question of Spanish and Portuguese citizenship today than Dalia, Kandiyoti, and Rina Benmayor. Not only are they the co-editors of a fantastic book, Reparative Citizenship for Sephardi Descendants, returning to the Jewish past in Spain and Portugal, which just came out this week in paperback, and you can find out more information about it out front. But they've also undertaken a major oral history project interviewing over 60 Sephardic descendants around the world about the question of Spanish and Portuguese citizenship. We're fortunate to have them with us to share their insights. Rina Benmayor is Professor Emerita of Humanities and Communications at Cal State Monterey Bay and past president of the Oral History Association. Her first book focused on Ladino romances, songs, and we are pleased that she contributed all her field recordings from the 1970s to the UW Sephardic Studies collection, and you can listen to those recordings she made right here in Seattle at the University of Washington Sephardic Studies website. Many people who, the parents and grandparents of a number of people sitting here today were among those with whom Rina sat down to record their songs. She has also worked extensively on Latinate culture and feminist narratives. She also seems to have intuited this multi-rooted dynamic of Sephardic identity, because as she wrote in an autobiographical essay more than 20 years ago, I don't know if you remember this, even before we first met when I was in graduate school, she described how she doesn't really feel like a wandering Jew in the stereotypical sense, but rather, as she grew up between New York, Mexico City, California, she writes, each migration seems more like a coming home, like pulling through the weft of language and culture and looping it back over the warp of this life in the making. I really like that line. You remember that one? You could quote yourself later. It's a good one. Dalia Kandiyoti is a professor at City University of New York College of Staten Island, and she researches and teaches comparative diaspora studies, American studies, hemispheric studies, and world literature. Originally from Turkey, she came to the United States as a teenager, and we've known each other for about 10 years, not quite as the 20 that Rina and I have known each other, but a long time already. Her first book, Migrant Sites, brings together European, Jewish, and Chicano and Puerto Rican literatures. Dialogue across diasporas is also a theme in her second book, The Converso's Return, where, among many other themes, she refers to the philosophy of Edgar Morin, whom I referred to earlier. But I remember first encountering Dalia's work in a fantastic essay she wrote that analyzes American Jewish literature and tries to figure out what makes Jewish literature Jewish. And she talks about Israel Zangwill's famous book, The Melting Pot. You're familiar with the image of America as a melting pot? Well, it's a very famous and also problematic phrase associated with the United States. And what Dalia does is she points out what is usually overlooked, which is the protagonist of this very famous book, this very famous image of America, is of Portuguese, Sephardic, Jewish heritage. Isn't that fascinating? So what is also interesting is how this figure became invisibilized and his roots became incomprehensible in a broader American Jewish and American public space. She goes on to show how the figure of the Sephardic Jew can function as, what she says, a cipher for the contemporary imagination. There are speakers. Okay. We'll get started then. I'm going to, excuse me, go back here. Bienvenidas. Thank you very much for joining us, Rina and Dalia. I'd like to get right into the meat of your work because you dealt both with the oral histories and you dealt with the scholarship in your edited volume, and I know you've done research in a variety of other sources as well. I was hoping you could begin by bringing us up to the more contemporary moment of the 21st century and talk to us a little bit about why and how the Spanish and Portuguese laws offering citizenship to descendants of Sephardic Jews materialized back in 2015.
Hello, everybody. First of all, thank you, Devin, for this great introduction, and thank you for inviting us here. It's my first time in Seattle, so I'm really honored and happy to be here. And thank you to everyone who made this possible. So let me get right into it and start answering your question. As some of you might know, Spain, especially, though now Portugal, has had long-standing special dispensations for Sephardic people to acquire forms of Spanish nationality. So in 1924, there was a royal decree that allowed some Jews, and it was a limited one, Spanish nationality until 1930. It expired in 1930. But the royal decree remained, and in 1982, after the Franco dictatorship, Sephardic Jews were added to the list of nationals of countries with which Spain has had a long-standing relationship. So this was part of the Civil Code, and Sephardic Jews, along with Latin Americans, people from Equatorial Guinea, and the Philippines, became sort of the populations with special relationship to Spain who could have this citizenship opportunity. But it was limited for the Sephardic Jews in ways that it wasn't for the other populations. So then, coming towards the 2015 law from that 1982 provision, the 2015 laws in Spain were, as our the contributors to our volume show, especially Michal Friedman and Daniela Flessler's article, Davide Aliberti's, Alfonso Aragones's. I urge you to read the articles for the full entire story. But the Federation of Jewish Communities in Spain instigated the 2015 laws by asking the Spanish Minister of Justice, Alberto Ruiz Gallardón, to finally put in place a law that provides equal citizenship, because the other laws did not. And by 2015, Parliament approved the law, and it was unanimously approved by all parties on the left and the right, though the left parties had some more demands that weren't met, which was the inclusion of the descendants of the Muslim Spaniards who were expelled, and also of the Sahrawi people. So that's what brought us to 2015. And interestingly, there are two major ideologies behind sort of what made this happen. And one of them, Devin, you already referred to, which was the Philo-Sephardism that began over 100 years ago, with the desire of Spanish liberals to help Spain restore itself through the reintegration of Sephardic people, restore itself from its fall, from its loss of empire, and so on. And so those Philo-Sephardic discourses that valorize Sephardic history in Spain actually are reflected in the laws in 2015's laws because the discourse is one of loyalty of the Sephardic people to Spain. Well, you saw that in one of the poems. And whether or not this was a prevailing Sephardic sentiment around the world, this was the main discourse of gratitude and loyalty. And if I can just share with you the language of this is in the preamble of the law. So the preamble states. Quote, the children of Sepharad maintain an abundance of nostalgia immune to the transformation of languages and generations. So there's this idea that there's a continuum between the Sephardic people in Spain and the Sephardic people maintain their traditions. Actually, when King Felipe celebrated the laws, the 2015 laws, he thanked the Sephardic people for maintaining loyalty and love for Spain and continuing customs and traditions. So there's this idea that there's a mutual loyalty and gratitude. Now, the other side of this is that Spain, emerging from the Franco period transitioning into democracy, needed to present itself as a democratic and tolerant nation. And the reintegration of Sephardic people, the act of a historical re-encounter and restitution was a part of this democratization and enhancing Spain's role in the European Union and so on. The same discourse has prevailed in Portugal, although Portugal didn't really have a pre-existing laws. But the same discourse of loyalty to Portugal and interest in Portugal showed up in their 2015 laws as well.
But that was probably harder to do because they couldn't speak to Sephardic Jews continuing to speak Portuguese, for example, in the way that Spain could point to Sephardic Jews speaking a variation, maybe at least, of Spanish.
The language was really important in the Spanish discourse. And, well, the Portuguese synagogues and Portuguese last names, I mean, those were seen.
My family belonged to the Portuguese synagogue in Salonika from the 1530s until World War II. So
there you go.
Yeah. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the differences between the laws? And we have a slide here that sort of encapsulates it. Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah. So, well, you can see with the slide that some of the key differences between the requirements from Spain and the requirements from Portugal had to do with taking tests. And having to travel to, in the case of Spain, you had to travel to Spain and sign your documents in front of a lawyer. So that meant, money. And you had to take a Spanish language test, which even if you knew Ladino, modern Spanish is, a little bit of a leap. And so many people would have to study or take a class to pass that test. And older people who, at a certain age, your ability to retain language gets a little bit dimmer. So all of those things were obstacles. So this just shows the difference between the two requirements. But and you'll see the difference reflected in the numbers. And that's the next slide. If you see now, actually, the number of applicants to Spain that were forwarded was 89,000, but the number of people who actually submitted applications was 135,000. But you look at Portugal and you see that this 261,750 is like double the amount. Now, that huge number hasn't been vetted first. Those are people who just applied, and sometimes the applications were rejected or they were duplicated or whatever. But still, it's a huge number. Those who have been granted to date from Spain, 73,000, Portugal, 74,000. Denied, this is a bit of a surprise. More than 7,000 people have been denied citizenship from Spain by the Ministry of Justice, whereas in Portugal it's very low. And Spain still has a huge number of applications to review. Portugal has a huger number of applications to review because everybody got, worried and started submitting their applications at the very last minute. So it's going to take a long time for that to finally be resolved. We don't have a lot of data from Portugal. The Spanish government does publish its data quarterly, so it's easier to find. So you'll see that there are appeals going on, and some of those appeals have been granted and some of them have been rejected. Every day we get news articles sent to us about applications that have been rejected. And the reasons become more and more stringent. Next slide. So here you see a country breakdown of, these are reported numbers of those who have applied in their original countries of residence. So you see that Latin America has a huge number of applicants, both to Spain and to Portugal. And the United States is, many of us are there. And Turkey also has a sizable number. And there are there's like a huge number of countries. So like Thailand, Sudan, Palestine, Tuvalu. Does anybody know where Tuvalu is? It's in the South Pacific. Japan, and so it's interesting. It's a huge spread of applicants from countries all over the world. So there's the global dimension. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of why people's applications were rejected? I mean, in terms of, because they couldn't demonstrate that they were. Because it was based on genealogy, right? I mean,
in some cases, there are various reasons for the rejections. In some cases, it's for those who are not Jewish, who are descendants of conversos. They had to document their genealogies every generation with actual documents, all the way back to the earliest known Sephardic, conquistador, if you will. Which is a very difficult thing to do.
Like back to the 15th century, basically, or 16th century.
16th, 17th century, yeah. And then in some cases, it's been because of the most recent case is because the special connection to Spain, and I'm talking about Spain in this case, because Portugal hasn't really denied that many people. The special connection to Spain, for those of us who applied early on, were if you donated to a Spanish nonprofit or, you opened a bank account or whatever, that was considered a special connection. Fast forward, that has just recently been rejected by the Court of Appeals as being insufficient proof of a special connection to Spain. So they find all kinds of reasons as you go along to tighten up.
So what sounds interesting is that you don't have to be Jewish necessarily to be eligible. You just have to be of Jewish ancestry. Is that correct?
Ancestry, exactly.
So right. So you talk about this in the book. So in a certain way, there's a fascinating reinscription of the blood logic of the Inquisition. I mean, in a certain sense, right? So it's based on genealogy. Right, is one of the primary vectors of identity.
And we had a wonderful interview with a woman from Portland who applied to Portugal. She was one of the first, and she got her Portuguese passport. But she said she has no connection to Portugal. She doesn't speak the language. She's never been there. She says, "What's my obligation here?" It's like I want to. The reason I got this passport is because now I have the blood. Before they didn't like my blood, now they like my blood. So it's again
was
the
it
blood.
Revenge? Do you think?
Anyway,
one of these surprise cases made news a few years ago when a stateless Palestinian woman was able to get citizenship for the very first time when she was able to demonstrate that she was also of Sephardic Jewish heritage.
when she realized that her great uncles had names like Moshe and Aaron and things like that, she was like, oh, interesting. And that was the start of her being able to demonstrate a case of Sephardic origin. So it's really fascinating how this dynamic has played out in perhaps unexpected ways.
I just should add that one of the more recent reasons for rejection has also involved the Federation of Jewish Communities of Spain, which was a place that you got your certificate of, I'm a bona fide Sephardi, right? So more recently, after the pandemic, they were the Ministry of Justice was requiring that the Federation be the only one authorized to issue these certificates. But the certificates after 2024 did not specify that it was for the 2015 citizenship law. It said to whom it may concern. So that became invalid. Even the Federation's own certificates became invalid in front of the law.
Fascinating. So maybe you can speak about your oral histories for a second, and you can see the wide range of folks that you also interviewed here from many different countries, with Latin America and the Caribbean being a very prominent place, but also the U.S. and Turkey. Can you speak a little bit about how you found your informants, maybe, briefly?
Well, mostly... Well, starting with Rina, right? Because Rina is an applicant herself and a citizen of Spain now. So it started with our sort of friendly conversation about how that process was going. And when we decided to launch an oral history project, we realized that there are people around the world who are applying, and the easiest and most affordable way of interviewing people was by Zoom. So we started doing that in 2017, and mostly through the snowball method, one person leading us to others. So we started with Rina's cousin. And then we went off to people and places, we didn't know people were applying from. And one of the surprises was that at the beginning, when the laws were first announced, we thought that they applied to people with Sephardic Jewish identity. And then we found out that people who are not Jewish could also apply based on their ancestry, as you mentioned. So that was a surprise because it was unexpected, because the formulation was always about Sephardi Jews and also about rescuing Sephardi Jews. And one of the instigating factors for the Federation to request this law was the situation of what they perceived as the situation of Jews in Venezuela and Turkey. And so it was really Sephardi Jews were at the center of the discussions. And then because the law cannot discriminate on the basis of religion, anybody with Jewish ancestry could apply without being Jewish themselves.
So you can discriminate on ancestry, but not on religion. Okay.
Right. Yeah. So then that's why you have so many applicants and so many from Latin America who are most likely not Jewish identified, but have Jewish ancestors.
Do you have a sense of the proportion of what percentage of the applicants identify as Jewish and what percent do not? Any guesses or sense of that?
It's hard to say. I mean, because there's no data about that. But because there aren't that many Sephardic Jews in Latin America, we can say that the majority of those who applied from Latin America must be not identified as Sephardic Jewish. So, and of course also others who without a Jewish identity also applied. So either because they were of other religions, or because they were Danmes or Sabbatarians from Turkey.
Descendants of Jewish converts to Islam.
Yeah.
That's another special group of the Ottoman Empire. Yeah. So can you tell us a little bit about why people did apply? What are some of the reasons why people did apply?
Well, essentially, I think there are two reasons. One you could classify as emotional, symbolic reasons, and the other would be instrumental reasons, like practical reasons. And in most cases, it's a combination of the two. But many people spoke very eloquently about their affective feelings, about this opportunity. And we have a clip from Marcelo Benveniste, who spoke really beautifully about this. And I'll try to read it. Unfortunately, we couldn't use his voice for technical reasons, but the clip, and it's my translation of his Spanish, so we can't hear it in Spanish either. But he says, I am moved that a decision made by the Spanish state unites me with those ancestors from 600 years ago. And to think that I am doing this procedure today because my great-great-great-grandfather lived there in Spain, and that history that we have lived with for so long, that includes an entire chain of ancestors before me. I am also part of that history. I form part of that chain. And even if this view is somewhat romantic, I like it. The fact of being part of a history that I have always felt passionate about, well, I really like that a lot. It makes me feel really good. So, we use that quote often because it just really encompasses the feeling of the connection.
Yeah, that effective connection. That resonates with some of those poems, too, in a certain sense. Yeah. And so in terms of the instrumental,
Oh,
go ahead.
sorry.
Yeah. Another reason is that people are moved by the gesture. So a lot of people told us that, that...
Closer.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. A lot of people told us that they were very moved by the gesture, and many told us that when, again, King Felipe addressed the Sephardic Jewish community in Spain, he said, we have missed you so much, and he started the speech that way. So a lot of people said, they were moved by this, but also that it was a beautiful gesture. So someone from Turkey who's involved with the Portuguese consulate thought Portugal's was a beautiful gesture. Others from Latin America thought, actually one person who converted to Judaism long before the laws were in place, he said that the laws were tikkun olam, so a repair, a kind of a repair of the world. And another person said that Portugal should serve as a model for other nations to do the same. So they had sort of multiple reasons of appreciation, the personal and the kind of the larger, wider political.
One of our narrators from Venezuela, who is a professor, had a very interesting response. She actually is not Jewish, but she derives from the Jews of Curacao, who eventually assimilated into Venezuela. But she said here we go. For me, the Spanish passport is more of a reclamation of my Sephardic roots rather than my Spanish roots. So she calls her passport, this is my Sephardic passport, which is a very interesting construct. Yeah.
Yeah, actually among the Converso descendants and the Sabbatai and Donme descendants, when they
who are not Jewish, who are not Jewish identified, when they received their certification of Sephardic ancestry from the Federation of Jewish Communities in Spain, that was more meaningful to them, some said, than the citizenship itself even. So because they had been, they felt, or many felt, sort of ripped from their roots, and having an official certificate that says you have Sephardic ancestry was extremely important to them. Yeah. Re-rooted them in their past. It gave them a sense of
that's right, because
history,
that's right. Of the Converso descendants that we interviewed, there were, and the Sabbatai and Donme ones, there were two kinds, basically. The ones who were aware of their ancestry before the laws, because they had done research, because there were practices in their families, and those who were not aware and only became aware because of the citizenship opportunity. And so either people in their family said, well, actually, we are Jewish, so why don't you apply? And so that was a big shock to a lot of people, from Turkey to Latin America. And so, there were two kinds. So there were people who were just discovering it, and some of them cared about the roots, and some of them didn't, but many did. And so there are just so many kinds of people who applied and so many responses. It's really hard to kind of say one thing about them.
Could you say a little more about maybe the instrumental aspects?
Well, the instrumental aspects, the pragmatic aspects of applying for citizenship are obvious. I think people want freedom of travel in Europe, the option of being able to stay as long as they want in Europe, and also travel visa-free to many countries than the countries that that they come from allow them to do. So again, this was true for people from Turkey all the way to Latin America who want passports for travel reasons. There were other people who said, well, I just want a plan B, right? Plan B in case I need to get out of my own country. And maybe surprisingly, this included a lot of Americans who said this. So a lot of Americans who wanted another option. So it wasn't only people in Turkey or Latin America.
But almost all of them, I suppose, already had some kind of nationality or citizenship. I mean, the Palestinian woman was maybe more exceptional. Is that correct?
Yeah. We didn't interview anyone who was stateless.
So I guess that's a completely different scenario. If you have no citizenship and this would become your first verse, is this your second, your backup, or your travel passport?
That's right. And or settlement. So for Venezuelans in the U.S., who have a really hard time. For example, because we interviewed several of those, this was just the easier route, right? They need options because it's hard to work with the Venezuelan citizenship in the U.S. So
do you think there's a correlation between countries that have had some instability or economic problems or other kinds of challenges being an impetus for people to apply for the Spanish and Portuguese citizenship?
Sure, but that includes the United States.
That includes the United States. No, I understand. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Very, very interesting.
We had both Sephardic Jews and Sephardi Descendants who did not identify as Sephardic Jews apply from the United States.
And of course, that it's not uncommon for Jewish people to say, I need a reserve passport just in case.
Right. Yeah, that's for sure.
And the other thing that's interesting is that of the 60-some people that we interviewed, 5 of them have relocated. They have actually moved to live in Spain or Portugal, and they are doing so now. And mostly they are younger people because they have more, opportunities. So, yeah.
How do you think the decision of folks to apply reflected their sense of identity or belonging?
One of the Brazilian narrators that we interviewed, she knew that her great-grandfather was Jewish, but they had lost their Jewishness, in the succeeding generations. And she said that for her, it was more of an internal journey, that how the transformation that took place inside of her as a result of the opportunity to apply for this law, for this passport, changed her. And she felt that before things had been ripped from her, she said it's more important for this internal journey of identity to take place than whether you get a rabbi that certifies that you have these roots. It's an internal thing. So that was very important as well. And then, of course, there's the case of the people from the British, from the UK, who were going through Brexit, right? And so for them, that was Brexit was cutting them off from their European roots, and many of them have family ancestry in France or Germany or, wherever, Portugal, they felt ripped up, like cut off from that. So the impetus was very real for them as well, very instrumental and also very symbolic. Yeah.
To reestablish their European sense, even if their country of residence and maybe citizenship was extracting itself from the EU at the time. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, people again varied. So some people felt like their identity was not impacted at all, especially young people who were not as attached to Sephardi culture or history, even if they were Sephardic Jews themselves, said that. And I said, well, it's just an opportunity. Others felt like there was an identity transformation, and as I mentioned, those who had been seeking a confirmation of Sephardic ancestry were gratified. I mean, so there's such a range of responses.
Can you tell us about this quote from Maria Gallegos from Albuquerque that you included here? Yeah, as a conversa, I think, right?
Right. So she's one of the ones who moved to Spain actually right after she got her citizenship, or maybe during the process. I can't remember. So she didn't know about her Jewish ancestry. She's from New Mexico, and she said that I'm just so happy to know who I am. So in other words, people felt like a repressed part of their own history was coming out into the open.
You feel like this reflected a sense that ancestry is destiny, or like that somehow they were they not who they were until they found out who their ancestors were? Like, how does that play out?
There is some of that. I think that's very common. People do DNA tests, or and then they say, well, I didn't know I am Italian, so they identify with the findings of their ancestry. I think that's very, very common. So we found that too. Yeah. I didn't know I was Jewish.
But of course, they're subject to the vagaries of DNA tests and things like that. I remember my uncle called me. He's like, he did a DNA test. He said, Devin, I'm adopted. Like, what do you mean you're adopted? He says, I got my DNA test. I'm not Jewish. I said, you're not Jewish? He says, no, I'm 8% Greek and 9% Italian and 12% Syrian and 5% North African. I was like, yeah, congratulations, you're Mediterranean. We already knew that.
Right.
But what's interesting is 23andMe does not have a Sephardic identity category. So that's part of the interesting. So if you are not a group that has enough visibility, you remain invisible. So that's why he was pan-Mediterranean, which is what Egal Morin was arguing anyhow in the first place.
And I had 13% Ashkenazi, and I'm going, really?
There you go. See? You're a fraud. You see? No, but I think it shows that the mixity, the movement is real. That's real. So then you had a great something.
I'm sure.
But, I mean, the boundaries were porous between the Russian Empire, the Habsburg Empire, the Ottoman Empire. People moved across there.
But, that's a really good question, because we did have some people report, that, I'm Sephardic, but I'm not Jewish. And so...
disentangling the two.
That's right. So I'm Sephardic, but I'm not Catholic. So disentangling identity and roots. And also kind of disentangling Sephardism from Judaism, right?
Which is also fascinating.
Yeah, that's right.
Prioritizing Sephardicness over Jewishness, seeing Sephardicness as relevant, Jewishness may be less so, or not at all.
Right.
In this case, he said, I'm not Jewish.
I'm not Jewish, but I am Sephardic.
But I am Sephardic.
So it's fascinating. So in other words, oftentimes we may conceptualize Sephardic as a subcategory of Jewish. This person has reconstrued it as its own separate identity.
Right.
Fascinating.
Right. Yeah.
Fascinating dynamics. We have another quote here from somebody in the audience. Maybe some of us know her. Oh, too far? Oh, we don't get there? Okay, tell me what you want to say before that. Okay, we have just a few more minutes, so we're going to have to wrap up soon.
Okay. Well, maybe you should...
Oh, okay, so we're going to skip the... Okay.
Well, tell me, what did you want?
The refusals.
Yeah. Well, maybe if we have a minute, we can maybe summarize it.
We didn't focus on interviewing people who refused, but one of the
people that decided they were eligible but didn't want to apply.
They did not want to apply. But one of the articles in our book does speak to that very directly. A gentleman who did interviews, and his narrator said, "Well, I don't want to legitimize this for Spain." And another person said, "Well, I object to being, subsumed as a Spaniard. I'm a Sephardic, but I don't want to be called a Spaniard." So there were reasons,
And presumably, demographically, probably most Sephardic Jews, people of Sephardic origin, did not apply. Presumably, we could imagine.
Presumably,
right? That's very, very fascinating. Sorry, no, go ahead.
So, in terms of homelands, that's your question, right?
Okay, sure, yeah.
I think it's very interesting because you all know that we have been categorized from the outside as outsiders, as protégés, as subjects, as survivors, as nationals, and as diasporic peoples. But so from the inside, from the perspective of in this case of Spain, the Spanish state and the Spanish people, there is, and I think Doreen speaks very eloquently to this point, of a shift that has taken place from being from philo-Sephardism to as an arm of politics or diplomacy, to the feelings of the Spanish people themselves. And so here again, I'm going to try to, the thing is that here we go. She said, the Spanish people had a hard time this is about 1969 when she was a study abroad student. So the Spanish people had a hard time wrapping their heads around a Jew, let alone a Sephardic, in 1969. So now you go and you say that you're Jewish and you're Sephardic, and they're happy to tell you, 3 out of 5 of them, that they think they have some Sephardic blood. For me, that is an amazing shift. And now the schools are teaching it, and they're talking about it, and there's a law, and it's cut off for me, so I don't know what the rest of the quote says. And so these people are taking a little ownership. I find that just absolutely fascinating. I think it gives hope, not just for that part of the world, but just in general, what exposure and education can do. I hope I've captured some of your intonations, Dory. We wanted to use your voice, but we couldn't.
Yeah.
So, that's on the part of looking at us. But in terms of how we then look at Spain is the question of nostalgia, right? Nostalgia. People talked about what they considered their homelands. Some did refer to Spain in a more remote sense, but more commonly it was where their families came from more immediately, and that was Turkey. Jane Mushabak talked about her she's from Çanakkale, and she said, I have an affective connection to Turkey. I don't have one to Spain. So that affective connection. Another gentleman from the UK said, our family migrated from Izmir to Germany, and then from Germany to the UK. So they were in Germany for a generation at least. And he said they didn't have any affective connection to Spain. For them, their emotional connections were to Turkey, to Izmir. And I think that's the most common for all of us, who come from that part of the world. That is some of us have a more intellectual connection to Spain, or a personal one. But Greece and Turkey and wherever your family came from is what you grew up with. So it's much closer. Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts? I mean, what do you think this project has meant for the participants? I mean, the whole possibility of gaining citizenship. What are your final thoughts about the meaning of this, and what is the future of this? I mean, is it a model for other countries? Is it a sui generis pair of offers that are particular to Spain and Portugal. How would you evaluate that?
Well, I think so it is sui generis because it extends so far back. So, over half a millennium, this kind of act of restoration.
Rather than your parents or grandparents. Other countries have that.
That's right. That's
right.
Your
parents or grandparents.
But other countries do have that and do have it even extending, like Italy has it extending to great-grandparents. Any Italian connection will get you citizenship. I mean, people are always applying from Latin America, Argentina especially, to Italy, for example. Other European countries have this ancestry and the same discourse of a cultural continuum between those in the diaspora and those in the country, so that there's a special connection between a Hungarian who's from Germany and Hungarians in Hungary, so they can get Hungarian citizenship, for example. So those kinds of laws do exist already. But this law especially was created to correct a historical wrong. So that's how it's referred to, as a historical wrong, as a mistake by political leaders. And so some people in our among our narrators were cynical about it. They thought that maybe Spain and Portugal were gaining something from this. And some people weren't. Some people did think, like as I mentioned before, that this could serve as a model. And I want to quote from Victor Silverman, who wrote an essay in our book, and we interviewed him also for his citizenship application to Portugal. So he said that, here I quote, "I think it's really good to support these things, laws like this. And in this world now, in this particular time, when people are making these moves to amend for past wrongs, to make their societies more diverse and more multicultural, and to embrace the complexities of our past and present. Those are the things we need to be supporting. Those are things that make the world a better place and make it a safer place for all of us." So there's that sense that this is more than gathering together of ethno-nationals who belong to a same group. There's a correction of a historical wrong. But then there are critics who also criticize the terms under which the laws were created. So this discourse of loyalty of the Sephardic people, the love for Spain, which didn't always exist, and we saw that in some of the poems. So there are lots of different opinions.
But that takes us back to Edgar Morin.
Yeah, tell us. Yeah. Final word, and then
this idea that, like Victor, in the context of what he was saying is, he says, "Look, I'm American. I don't want to give that up. I am Sephardic. I don't want to give that up. I am this. I am that." He says, "I should not have to give up any of my identities," but he focuses it on the political imperative of, at this moment in time, this is what we need to support. And you ask the question about what is the meaning of this in a world in which so many people can't get any papers, and I think that in a way it kind of it's a beacon, it's a gesture that says, hey, you don't have to attain to the strict interpretations of these things. We can go back half a millennia, and we can actually attempt to reconcile our past, which is what these laws actually try to do. They are now defunct, both of them, for other reasons, but I think it still stands as a kind of a model or an inspiration, if you will, for other governments to, hey, give refugees papers, give migrants papers.
On that, thank you very much, Rina and Dalia. But it's not over. if you're we just sort of began to graze the surface, and we are very fortunate that Rina and Dalia have contributed all of their oral histories to the University of Washington Sephardic Studies collection. They're all digitized. They have been transcribed and translated. You can go online. You can get that QR code there. You'll see the display page here. You can actually listen to the oral histories themselves. And we're very grateful for our students and for our staff who work tirelessly to bring this to fruition. And you can see here some examples. This is sort of like what it looks like. Somebody from Jamaica is included in the thing. We have young people also from Turkey. Estrellitas de Istanbul is a Ladino choir that my kids listen to. And Rina is featured in this project as well. So you can go there, check out, listen, delve further and deeper, and check out their book. If you haven't already, there's a nice discount code that you can get access to, and you can check out the new softcover book that has just come out. So we have a few minutes now for questions. So if you have a question, if you could please submit it through the Slido. That's the way that we're going to do it here. That would be most appreciated. So I'm going to start with some of the things on the Slido. I don't know, Fernanda, do you think you could type it in on there? Okay. All right. Well, let's do one or two here, and then I'll come to you. Okay. So one of the questions relates to how did these laws come to an end, and to what extent have they come to an end, and why did they end?
Spanish law came to an end in 21, 22, because the pandemic kind of muddled things a bit. It was only intended to be a 3-year law, or a 3-year window, and then it was extended for 1 more year, and then the pandemic, so there's still that backlog. But it doesn't apply. The only way that people now can apply is through a 2-year residency. So there's that opportunity, but you have to go and live there.
To go and live there. Yeah. So you're still eligible as a descendant of Sephardic Jews, but you got to live there now.
Right. And in Portugal, there were scandals scandals kind of happened on both sides. There was a fraud scandal for Spain, and then there was, the whole thing about the oligarchs, the Russian oligarchs in Portugal, and so, we didn't get into all that detail, but the Portuguese Parliament just this past month voted to rescind the Portuguese amendment to their nationality law for Sephardis and incorporate Sephardic Jews into the regular nationality requirements, which also required residency and requires now tests, language tests. And so Portugal really tightened up to where Spain was when it started. And so, they require that you show proof of a continual connection to Portugal.
That's a lot harder.
That's really hard.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Could you speak about, one of the other questions here picks up on a comment that was made about how Muslims in Spain are excluded from the law, and you mentioned it, Dalia, in terms of the left in Spain interested in that. Could you comment a little bit more about why they were excluded, why the left was interested in including them, and what the status is? Is there any possible future scenario in which they might get included according to the vision that you were describing with Silverman and your final comments around papers and documentation? How do you think about it?
Well, so the Muslim descendants and the Jewish descendants play a large role in the Spanish national imagination, but they play distinct roles. And to put it briefly, I think that and we have a couple of articles in our book about the refusal to give the same opportunity to the Muslim descendants. So I encourage you to read those by Elizabeth Bolorinos Alad and Elena Arillita and Laura Galian. So there are different ideas about who the Sephardi Jews and who the Muslims of Spain were, but the most distinguishing factor, and I keep coming back to this idea of loyalty, is that the Sephardi Jews are perceived as being loyal, and the loyalty is such an undergirding concept of these laws that it is easier to show that the Sephardi Jews have been loyal by keeping language, tradition, customs, and so on. The same loyalty is said to be absent among the Muslims who have not continuously spoken Spanish. So it's not completely true, but so there's that. And I think actually the one of the much criticized aspects of the Spanish law was that it required language tests and cultural knowledge, cultural and civilizational knowledge tests for people who were expelled and prevented from having that knowledge. But in an interview that Michal Friedman and Daniela Flessler did with one of the architects of the law, the Minister of Justice, he said, Ruiz Gallardón said that, well, the language tests will not allow the Arab people to apply, and so that's one of the points of the language test. So that's
specifically an exclusionary.
Yes, he said that in an interview to them. Yeah. So that's
and that probably has to do with the question of Muslims in Europe and borders and national culture and things like that. So Jews were not perceived as a threat, I guess, in the same way that Muslims
maybe
were.
Now soccer will change that.
maybe. Okay, I think we have time for just a couple more questions. I don't know, Fernando, you want to ask your question?
Well, first thing, I am the consul of Spain. Yeah, question. Well, the question is, thank you for everything you did in your book. Thanks to you for you doing. And my question is, why you never mention in your book like this passport is not the Spanish passport or the Portuguese passport, is the European passport? Because most of the people, because I know everybody in Seattle or in Washington has been applied, and 80% of the people are Latin American people. In this case, why you don't emphasize like to have these two passports are European passports?
We didn't have time to sort of go into the details, but one of the pragmatic reasons people applied for was to be able to travel to Europe easily. So I mentioned the ease of travel as one of the reasons. But also, I think Rina mentioned about maintaining a European passport for the UK citizens who applied. So staying a part of Europe was really important. I know people in their 80s who applied, and it's not that they're going to move to Portugal, but it's because they wanted to maintain that European identity. So,
but you're right in terms of the, especially for young people, the idea of being able to live any place in Europe, go to school any place in Europe, open businesses any place in Europe was very attractive. And we didn't emphasize it in the book. I mean, we don't have a specific article in the book about that, but it's definitely people say that I want to either go to Spain or Portugal, but I also can go to Europe. So it's.
I am going to ask you, like now, with the big investment of the big corporations, Microsoft, Amazon, in Spain, $27 billion in the next year. The priority to move people over there need to have European passports. And every weekend I do the paper of French, Italian, German, and Jews.
Great. So Fernando, he's the honorary Spanish consul here, and he's talking about new investments of Microsoft that will probably bring more people to Spain and to Europe more broadly. So that's something to.
Yeah, the issue of Europe is more in the interview. So if you want to hear the interviews in the archive, a lot of people mention this. Yeah.
Great. Well, we have a number of other very interesting questions, which hopefully we can share with you later, so you're aware of it, around people wanting to know about can they get Greek citizenship or Turkish citizenship? Thinking again about the multi-rootedness, I believe I'm eligible for 6 nationalities, which I have only one, but I should have gotten all of them, I guess. But I think that's sort of the question around multi-rootedness and these other places. You mentioned affective connection. People may feel more connection to more recent places, Greece and Turkey. There are also some questions related more to the political context around was this a sign of Spain and Portugal liberalization of their politics and opening up of their societies, and also some other questions relating to how something that you commented on, Rina, about the contemporary moment around refugees and migrants and questions around documentation and the protection that comes with the rights of citizenship. So I hope that we can continue this conversation. You are all now invited to come across the way to Walker Ames for a lovely reception with Sephardic cuisine. And once again, thank you very much to Rina and Dalia. Dios Muevos Ladineros, and thank you all for being here in person and online. Merci mucho. Al vernos.